Pathophysiology of bronchiectasis. Firstly, there is inflammation. Obstruction occurs due to the inflammation. In inflammation, the inflammatory process, the inflammatory process associated with pulmonary infection damages the bronchial wall. Inflammatory process associated with pulmonary infection damages the bronchial wall, causing a loss of its supporting structures. Loss of its supporting structures. And resulting in thick sputum that ultimately obstructs the bronchi. In pathophysiology, first one is the inflammation. Inflammation में क्या होता है, जब inflammatory process होती है that associated with pulmonary infection, it damages the bronchial wall. Bronchial wall जो है वो damage हो जाती है inflammatory process की वजह से, causing the loss of its supporting structures. There is loss of its supporting structures and resulting in thick sputum. और वहाँ पे क्या हो जाता है, जब लॉस हो जाती है सपोर्टिंग स्ट्रक्चर्स, लॉस हो जाती है ब्रोंकियल वॉल, डैमेज हो जाता है, इसकी वजह से क्या होता है, जो थिक स्प्यूटम है that ultimately obstructs the bronchi. Thick sputum generates and that ultimately obstructs the bronchi. After inflammation, there is distension. After inflammation, there is distension. After the obstruction, when the bronchi completely gets obstructed, the wall becomes permanently distended and distorted, impairing mucociliary clearance. When there occurs obstruction in the bronchi, then the bronchial wall becomes permanently distended and distorted and impairing mucociliary clearance. After distension, there is the collapse. Another step is the collapse. In collapse, the retention of secretions, and subsequent obstruction ultimately cause the alveoli distal to the obstruction collapse. Next step is the collapse. When there is retention of secretions and subsequent obstruction occurs. When there is retention of secretion and subsequent obstruction, ultimately this leads to the which leads secretions, retention of secretion and subsequent obstruction. This ultimately causes the alveolar distal to the obstruction collapse. After collapse, another step is the in pathophysiology, that is scarring. Inflammatory scarring or fibrosis replaces functioning lung tissue. Inflammatory scarring or fibrosis. This replaces functioning of the lung tissues. Then there arise the symptoms. In time, the patient develops respiratory insufficiency. With reduced vital capacity, कम होती है, decreased ventilation, and increased ratio of residual volume to total lung capacity. After scarring, when the lung tissues stop its functioning, in time जो patient है उसमें क्या आते हैं, respiratory symptoms उसमें develop हो जाते हैं. और ये symptoms develop होते हैं किसकी वजह से हो जाते हैं, by respiratory insufficiency होती है या reduced vital capacity आती है, decreased ventilation होता है, increased ratio of residual volume to total lung capacity. Because of these symptoms develop. This is the pathophysiology of bronchiectasis. Causes of bronchiectasis. Bronchiectasis जो है किसकी वजह से होता है? Bronchiectasis जो है, it is caused by a variety of conditions, including airway obstruction, pulmonary obstruction or pulmonary infection, and also genetic disorders. Bronchiectasis जो है किसकी वजह से होता है? It is caused by a variety of conditions including airway obstruction. Airway obstruction. In airway obstruction, when there is obstruction in the bronchi, जब obstruction आती है bronchi, distend the wall permanently. जो bronchi में wall होता है वो permanently distant होता है, dilate हो जाता है और इसमें impair होती है mucociliary action. Obstruction जो होती है किसकी वजह से होती है? In the respiratory tract में. This may be occur due to the foreign body. Airway obstruction, foreign body की वजह से, tumors और impacted mucus. This leads to the airway obstruction. Foreign body, tumors or impacted mucus. This leads to the airway obstruction and causes bronchiectasis. Another cause is the pulmonary infection. pulmonary infection या obstruction of bronchus जो है या complication of long term pulmonary infections, this occurs by pneumonia, tuberculosis. pulmonary infection जब होता है इसकी वजह से भी bronchiectasis होती है, for example pneumonia या tuberculosis. In addition to these, there is also genetic disorders that is responsible for bronchiectasis. Genetic disorders such as cystic fibrosis. This causes sputum to thicken in consistency. And finally obstruct the bronchi. And finally obstruct bronchi. Genetic disorders such as cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis की वजह से क्या होता है, जो स्प्यूटम होता है वो थिक हो जाता है, इनकॉन्सिस्टेंसी में वो ज़्यादा थिक हो जाता है, जिसकी वजह से फाइनली क्या हो जाता है, इसकी जब स्प्यूटम जो है ज़्यादा थिक होता है इनकॉन्सिस्टेंसी में, तो इसकी वजह से फाइनली जो ब्रोंकाई होते हैं दैट गेट्स ऑब्स्ट्रक्टेड लीडिंग टू द ब्रोंकाइटिस. Also there are idiopathic causes that is responsible for bronchitis, that is viral or bacterial infection, viral or bacterial infection, inhalation. Viral or bacterial infection में क्या बोलते हैं, when there is inhalation of irritant fumes or dust या chemical solvents या smoke की वजह से, that leads to bronchitis. Also immunodeficiency states. This all leads to the bronchitis. These are the causes that cause bronchitis. Thank you.